On day 16, we'll be returning on the most important part of character creation, the roles. Now we'll be redefining our roles from the 4 originals that were presented to you to 2 new ones, for a total of 6 roles. We'll be refining our characters in terms of behavior, goal, and quirks. We'll be exposing how you can make use of this role to automate your process even more. And from day 16 to day 22, we're gonna develop your characters. Now, having 6 characters, potentially 6 main characters, will be your maximum for now. Now, we'll need only 6 very developed characters. That's just enough. And the 6 characters will all have distinct goals. Distinct, definite, separate, but not independent. And this goal will cause them to have definite reaction in due situation, allowing us to create a context. This reaction will have consequences, namely on the character's relationship, but also on the consumption of resources, on the availability of these resources, and on the creation of new stakes and issues. The goals of the characters will be the source of influence of all these relationships, shift, alignment, shift, resources availability, and creation of new stakes. Reaction is created by a context. A context engenders predictability. Predictability creates attachment, and attachment provokes reactions. These are the 4 roles presented earlier in this course. And these 4 roles can be used at least 2 additional times. Or said in a different manner, if you have 12 characters in your story, if you decide to have a story with 12 characters, and it can be 4 main characters and 8 secondary characters, or it can be a split of 6 main characters and 6 secondary characters. You can make use of these roles 2 additional times before it becomes excessively predictable, before it becomes a little bit boring maybe. So you may want to have a maximum of 3 rivals in your story, a maximum of 3 Enticer, a maximum of 3 Advisor, and a maximum of 3 Arbiter in your story. If the story is long, we'll recommend that if you're writing something like a trilogy, for example, or a longer series. Or unless you're doing that, we'll recommend that you use only these 4 roles 1 time each. Now, these 4 roles are absolutely enough, because any simple story can be based around 4 characters. 4 main characters is a large amount. Now, you have to see that in terms of scale, 1 main character is enough for a short story, but 4 main characters mean that you can have 4 points of view. You can have 4 different perspectives in the same scene. You can have 4 chronological phrases. So 4 characters, if you have to write a series, let's say of 6 books, 4 main characters could be enough for you, because it's already a large amount of main characters. Again, main characters. And around these 4 ones, you can add some supporters, some additional characters, even if they are not directly based on these roles. Because you can decline these roles into variations to create a high degree of affinity. So if 4 main characters are enough, if 4 main characters may even be too much if you're only starting, why add 2 additional ones? Now, why present to you the 2 additional roles as late as 2 weeks in the process, or even at all, because of the explanation we just had? This course is supposed to help you to achieve 2 things. This course is supposed to help you to create attachment between the characters, the public, and yourself. So there are three entities here. There are your characters, your public, and you. And all these three should be as attached as possible. That's the first achievement we intend to allow you to create. The second one is to understand characters' dynamics. So as you can see, the two goals are directly linked, because if you want to create more attachment between the characters, the public, and yourself, you'll have to understand inter-character relationships. And this episode, this section of this episode especially, is completely dedicated to that, to allow you to encompass inter-character relationships. Now, on day 22 and 23, we'll start to develop another object, another tool, which we will call the relationship map. And in this tool, in this map, we'll come back to this map, to this schema you have on the screen right now, and we'll develop it again. But not necessarily the individual part. We'll develop the individual part, but what we will develop, especially on this day, on day 22 and in day 23, is the links between all these parts. For now, we're almost only going to present to you the individual section. We'll present to you the rival role again, because now we have a new word on screen, the word change, and change is the motivation part, which is something we have only mentioned earlier. We're gonna present to you the leader, the enticer, again, the advisor, again, the sponsor, very different role from all the others, and the arbiter. Now, we'll put in direct relationship, we'll do it just right now at the beginning of the course, these roles, and the genre they're most likely to be associated with. As you may remember, that's a parallel we've already established when we only add 4 roles and only 4 genres. Now we're doing it again. The rival role is most suited. Again, most suited. It is most likely to be the character that you will want to see as a protagonist, as a main character, as the dominant point of view in an action type of story. The leader is most likely to be the main character, and some of these will sound a little bit counterintuitive, but we'll explain that in detail in the relationship map. The leader is most likely to be your protagonist when it comes to comedy. Now, just a note on comedy right now. Comedy does not necessarily mean laughter. Comedy does not always need laughs. If you refer yourself to the absurd subgenre, the absurd part of comedy, absurd is not necessarily meant to provoke laughter. And same thing with sarcasm. Sarcasm is, in its essence, an attack. An attack on an idea, an attack on a concept. A sarcastic person does not necessarily want to create laughter. Sarcasm is used for validation. So it can create laughter, such as absurd can create laughter. And that's really a common trait between sarcasm, absurd, and satire. The three of them are not necessarily meant to create laughter, but most of the time an in-depth reflection, especially the satire part if you're using allegories. When it comes to an Enticer character, Enticer has been largely defined since the beginning of the goal as an adventurer. An Enticer is an adventurer character, and she wants to explore. She's open on the world, she's willing to wander in the world and wonder on the merits of a new environment. She's enticed by friendship. That's an adventurer character. The Arbiter, the advisor character, in its essence, because it's an empathetic character, it's an attached character, is meant in a way to be a dramatic character, because she will want, and that's the motivation part, will develop just afterwards. You can see the motivation part of the advisor is satisfaction. She will intend to reach a certain degree of satisfaction at the end of a conflict. So drama is most suited for an advisor type of character, because she is in the attachment, she's in the empathy, she's in the emotion. Well, same thing for the sponsor. The sponsor is a character which is motivated by legacy, and we'll treat motivation just after this. The fact that the sponsor is motivated by the long term, the long run, the reflection on her journey, on her life, will make her a saga-oriented character. And now for the last one, for the Arbiter. The Arbiter will be presented as a detached character, because detachment is a fundamental behavior trait in arbiters. The equity factor is also. And it may cause issues. The detachment factor, the prevalence of equity over everything else, may incline the arbiter to take decisions which could be considered as horrible decisions. Because the arbiter is not attached, or at least she's as little attached as possible, she will take decision which may cause a lot of pain in the sake of equity. So, attaching each of your roles to a specific genre will also allow you to automate your process. Now remember, we are using roles because we want to create a certain degree of predictability. The reaction of a character is dependent on a role, and in a due situation, she will act in a certain manner. Now we'll describe how each of these roles is most likely to act. So let's introduce the concept of motivation. So you have 6 words here: change, achievement, discovery, satisfaction, legacy, and closure. Motivation is not goal. A motivation is not a goal. If your main character is a rival, her motivation will be change, because that's her role, but that's not her goal. Her goal will be something defined by her origins, the place she's born, the people she's been raised with. That's the goal of the character. That's inherent to the character, to the individual. The motivation is inherent to the role, to the type of individual, to the rival here. So how does a rival type of character act and react? She acts and reacts, so relentlessly and recklessly. She acts in favor of change. She wants the situation to move forward. She acts in the sake of evolution. A rival is not a stable character. She's not a steady character. She's a character who is dedicated to change. So, same for a leader. A leader's motivation is achievement. She will want to help herself and others to achieve their goal. Now, what does achieve mean? achievement is not here to be considered. And just because she can, she's the leader. But look at all the other characters, the rival, the Enticer, the advisor, the sponsor, the arbiter. They all have a motivation. They all have a sense of progression in their journey because they're characters. But all of their progression is also defined by the goal of the character. So the leader is the same. The leader's motivation is defined by our goal, but her motivation is prevalent on her actions. During your story, during the whole of your story, your multiple stories, if you have a series, if you already plan a sequel for your first one, will be conditioned by cohesion. Every kind of storytelling is conditioned by cohesion. And cohesion had to be verified in the transition in between every scene and between every chapter and between every story. That's the 3 scales of cohesion. So you have to be sure that motivation is always prevalent in the character's decision, even if it is only attached to the character's role. So now you start to have a clearer picture of how roles are important. The roles of characters are meant to define them in the long run. Now, a note on behavior traits. You'll realize that on this map, on this picture, you only have 2 behavior traits. Now, for example, for the leader, you have devoted and sacrificial. So that will be the 2 behavior traits that will define half of the character. The other half is defined by the individual behavior trait you choose to give to your character. The 2 behavior traits you choose to grant them, which will define them as individuals. And generally, these 2 behavior traits will directly be linked to their origins and goal. Now, for the Enticer. The Enticer is defined by a wish for discovery. So the motivation of the Enticer, which again is a character which is aligned with the adventure genre, is discovery. And now, you begin to realize that everything here seems to be extremely tightly knitted, because we're using a specific semantic field. We're using the semantic field of adventure here in this case. Wonder, openness, willing to visit the world, enthusiastic, avid, discovery. All of that is directly linked to adventure. So if your roles are prevalent on your characters, your genres are prevalent on your stories. The same thing for every role here. Relentless, reckless, the pride, sense of pride. All of that is linked to action. Now we spend a little bit more time on the second half of the scheme with the advisor to start. So the advisor's motivation is satisfaction. So that may sound straightforward. The advisor wants the parties in the conflict to be satisfied in the end of the conflict. Now you may already have a form of paradox in your mind, because if there's a loser, how can there be satisfaction on both sides? Well, as the advisor is the most empathetic role here, not the only one, it's just the most empathetic. For example, as you can see, the leader is devoted and the Enticer is enthusiastic, so the devoted character and enthusiastic character will have to be empathetic to some degree in order to apply their devotion and their enthusiasm, to motivate others and help others. But the advisor is the most empathetic one, meaning she is the one which will be most likely to understand her enemies, her foes, and their motivations and their goals. So the advisor is also the most attached one. So when a character which is identified as an opponent, as an enemy, loses, because that's how conflict works in most stories. A character wins and a character loses. The advisor will, to a limit, will suffer from this loss. She will also suffer from her enemies, her foes, her opponents' loss. Because she realizes that if someone loses in a conflict, it creates frustration. If it creates frustration, it may lead to a new conflict. And if it leads to a new conflict, that's more problems, basically. So the advisor is highly motivated by the satisfaction of the two parties, or at least two parties, in a conflict. Because the less satisfied they are, the most frustrated they are, and the most likely they are to create new conflicts. Now, you'll start to realize that on the right side of the scheme, when it comes to rival, leader, and enticer, all these motivations are mostly based on short-term. These are short-term motivations. They are linked to a will to make things advance. The rival wants people, environment, situation to change. The leader wants to help others and herself to achieve. And the enticer wants to seek new things. So all of these are quite short-term motivations. On the other side, the advisor, the sponsor, and the arbiter want satisfaction, want legacy, and that will be the most obvious one because legacy is inherently long-term, and want closure of a due situation. So all of these three are more sustainable motivation, are more long-termist motivation. Now for the sponsor is, as you may have seen, the only trait, the only role which does not have an inherent weakness, because resilience in itself does not bear any inherent weakness. A character which is resilient may have weaknesses and probably will have weaknesses because she will have other behavior traits. But a role which here is defined by its resilience does not in itself bear any form of counterpart, because in itself a resilient character is meant to manage her own perception of weaknesses. And if your character can manage her own perception of weaknesses, and this is true for all characters, if a character can manage her sense of weakness, her perception of weakness, she can own it faster, she can hone it faster, and she can turn it to something else faster. So, how's the sponsor motivated by legacy now? You realize that you have something quite similar on the other side. The leader is motivated by achievement, and the sponsor is motivated by legacy. So, what's the difference? As said earlier, achievement will be considered the short-term counterpart of legacy. The sponsor does not necessarily achievement right now. She does not want, not achievement. She doesn't want results right now. The sponsor, and it's not written here, but the sponsor is more patient. She has to be inherently more patient since she's more resilient. The sponsor wants results in the long run, in the very long run. The leader wants results now, because she knows people are driven by results. She knows characters are driven by results. And if someone sees their results, they're more likely to want to do more. So that's how achievement works. Immediate results, more motivation, more accomplishment. Legacy, that's the opposite. You try, you fail. And from failure, not from success, from failure, you want to try more. So that's the basic opposition you have here between long-term and short-term. In the case of legacy, in the case of long run, you learn more from failure. And that's really what we meant. You learn more from failure. You do not learn exclusively from failure. You learn from success as well. But this will be more on the other part. On the other part. So, in a sense, because you can really extrapolate that to every other world. On this side, we will read it properly. On this side, on the short-term side, short-term success. Teaches you that you can accomplish, that you can achieve, and therefore gives you more motivation to continue now. Whereas failure teaches you that you've met a situation, you're gone through this situation, and because you've gone through this situation, which was painful, you're most likely to go through other painful situations. And again, now for the last part. There is one rule we haven't presented yet, but let's restart all that. Let's get back to the beginning. So the rival, relentless, reckless, change, action, pride. The leader, devoted, sacrificial, achievement, comedy, joy, motivation, happiness, you may say, even for the leader. The enticer, enthusiastic, fervid, discovery, adventure, wonder, openness, amity. The advisor, empathetic, attached, dramatic, satisfaction, emotion. The sponsor, saga, legacy, contemplation, pondering, attachment, and resilience. All of these words, all of these keywords are supposed to fix ideas. They're supposed to fix ideas for the characters, for the public, and for yourself. Making use of semantic fields, making use of concepts and ideas which are tied together by semantic fields will reinforce the cohesion your stories already exude. Was presented to you earlier in this course the possibility for you to treat the Arbiter as the menace in your story, as the hidden antagonist, as the main / final antagonist of your story. Why is that? The arbiter, the purple element in this scheme, will often be perceived as a character whose decisions are the less relatable. And it goes down to even these roles: motivation, change, achievement, discovery, satisfaction, and legacy. Even legacy, these 5 other words, you may hear them often. Change, achievement, discovery, probably very often. Satisfaction, to some degrees. Legacy, it's rarer. It's a rare word to use, but you may hear it. You may know it. Now, what does closure mean in this context? Closure, and you'll have to go back and forth between the arbiter and the advisor to understand the nature of each of these 2 roles. The closure is the objective part of conflict resolution. So where satisfaction is turned to the frustration part of the conflict, the subjective part of the conflict, knowing if the 2 parties are satisfied by the outcome. The closure focuses on the situation, not on the individuals. The closure, the only concern is that the outcome of the conflict was equitable and it did not, therefore, benefit any other party. So, the closure may push an arbiter to a decision which was not in the interest of any of the parties at all. The only aim here is to not grant any asymmetric benefits to any of the 2 parties. So now, one of the parties may have had enough resources to sustain herself in the short term, and the other party may have been deprived of some of her resources for the long term this time. It will be quite difficult to imagine that without multiple examples and multiple contextualizations. But try to imagine that the closure, most of the time, will not satisfy any of the 2 parties. Because it is not the goal of the closure. In fact, an arbiter does not mind if the 2 parties are dissatisfied with the outcome. What matters is that there is a proportion in the decision, or said in another way, that the resources available are attributed to all the parties in a reasonable manner. Not a satisfying manner, just reasonable or equitable, or to some degree proportionate. It's supposed to satisfy needs, and you maybe want to consider it this way. Whereas satisfaction will put an emphasis on wants. It does not mean that satisfaction only considers wants and not needs at all, because you have to satisfy the needs of the character first before starting to satisfy their wants. Let's say the closure is a little more rigid in terms of needs satisfaction. Because most of the time, the closure, and therefore the arbiter, will be willing to satisfy only the character's needs. And by the character's need, we mean what they need for their survival, not for anything else. Whereas the advisor will be more inclined to put into balance the needs and the wants, to satisfy the wants partially at least. Now consider that if the advisor listens to the issues of the party, listens to the demands of the parties, the arbiter will mostly consider the resources available. The arbiter will mostly consider what can be given, not what is demanded. Because if you're in the very long term, and here, as earlier said, if the right side is short term and the left side is long term, when you go to the top right side to the bottom right side, so from change to achievement to discovery, you start to gain some velocity and you start to gain some, steadiness. It may seem paradoxal, but the change motivation is the most short-termist and the closure motivation is the most long-term. The closure, and therefore the arbiter, will consider the economical and ecological balance of an environment more than any other character, than any other role, and therefore than any other motivation. So that's mostly what the equitable and detached behavior traits mean. Equitable because everybody has needs, and detached because all these needs cannot be fulfilled.